Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the next session of Startup Sprint series. Dr. Idress Khawaja, Dean, Air University School of Management, introduction करवाएंगे. Mark Turrell, our today's speaker.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hi, Mark. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sparing time for this talk. Professor Mark is Associate Professor at the Hult Business School, and he has been associated with a number of distinguished institutions like Kennedy School, and he has been doing a lot on scaling up and spreading the entrepreneurship. So we hope to hear a lot on scaling up and how to spread entrepreneurship. So it's over to you, Professor Mark.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I can share my screen as well. So it's, I can't share my screen. I don't think I can. Whoever is the host, if you can allow me to share my screen, that would be good. Otherwise, then I just have to.
Mr. Kindly allow Mark to share his screen.
Let me see if that works. And there we go. Yep. Stop scaling here. Stop scaling here. And if I do present. Okay, so hopefully this works. You can all see my screen saying scaling the missing piece of the innovation puzzle.
Yeah.
Very good. So as I begin, so my background, and thank you very much for sharing a little bit. I'm a technology entrepreneur by background. I'm an entrepreneur by background. So I started my first ever business when I was 6 years old. And this was a puppet show. So I was in the entertainment business. And I got my mother to get me some felt to make some finger puppets. And at school, I persuaded the school to give me a room for free. And we created a little flyer, and on 2 days we had a bunch of kids, and my first business venture was so good, one child actually peed their pants. It was so brilliant. So I've been doing entrepreneurial stuff for quite a while, and happy to just take this conversation in any direction that it wants in terms of business, because after all, scaling is only one piece of a business. Scaling for many people is the missing piece of a business, but it is worthwhile describing the beginning. So I started my first proper business when I was 23, and I fortunately was able to end up taking that business public on the London Stock Exchange in 2006. So taking that business and having it switch and change in response to what customers want is something that I've done both through education and then naturally. And I've made many mistakes. So I'm the product of mistakes rather than, to some extent, successes. But one of the things that I've always found fascinating is this notion of scale, because it's all very well having a nice little business. But there's a certain point when you might decide, how do you increase it tenfold in size without increasing your cost tenfold as well? And so this is one of those areas that have always been fascinating to me, is how do you scale? At the same time, I've always been fascinated into innovation. In fact, my first business was an innovation company called Imaginatic, and we had built some software for doing what was called idea management. How do you collect ideas from employees and your customers and suppliers, develop the ideas and do something with these ideas? And that meant that at the heart, this business was around process improvement, ideas for cost reduction, but it was fundamentally an innovation company. And what I found very interesting is some of our clients did exceptionally well and really scaled their innovations. Some of them had the same ideas and didn't manage to scale. And I really found that if you look at, let's say, the successful creation of value, that requires scaling. So what I'd like to describe to you today is based on my book. So if you're interested, you can send some links afterwards. I wrote a book that's available on Amazon and Kindle called Scaling. Small Smart Moves is the premise. Because what I've been looking at then is there's a big difference between linear growth and non-linear growth. A linear growth says I have one shop. If I have 2 shops, I can potentially double. If I have 3 shops, I triple. and that's linear. But there's certain types of businesses where you can scale it like crazy, where the addition of a little bit of resource can make a huge return. And what I've been looking at is that how do you grow businesses and other things dramatically with relatively little effort? And therefore, what I'm going to take you through now and then open for discussions is going to be around how scaling is then super important for businesses, but how quite often it's the missing piece of the puzzle. Also, if you have any questions, you can ask questions at any time. So I'm very happy to break the flow of this thing in any way that you want. So I'm here for you to share. So if I start already by putting scaling into context, because one of the ways of looking at scaling is just how do you make something big, but quite often what people are trying to do is they're trying to innovate. They're trying to do new things either within a business or they're trying to do new things in a new business. And when we use the word innovation, I have a common definition of innovation that I always use and have used with my clients. For me, innovation has been a process. It's a process of doing new things, and that should deliver value. So now I've actually found, and this is maybe not so important if you're looking at small businesses, but if you are studying innovation, there's an exercise that you can do. Maybe I'll give you this as a little bit of homework exercise to do. If you're in a team, if you're in a group and you're working on innovation, what is a fascinating exercise is get everybody to write down privately, separately, their own definition of innovation. And then afterwards, you should share each other's definitions. One of the things that I found is that some people have definitions, particularly of innovation, that are so different from everybody else's. It means that we're able to have conversations around a table or virtually and all nod, yes, we agree, but it's actually all completely different. I was working with a European insurance company, and they had 10 senior executives. 9 senior executives all had pretty much a variant of this definition that I had. One executive, his definition was that he would only want to work on projects that were new to the world, break through to the insurance industry. The problem was that he was the head of the innovation department. And so he was so extreme in what he wanted that it didn't fit what any of the other executives were expecting. But so just understanding this definition of words is important. So innovation is the process of doing new things that delivers value. What we find there, though, is that if we begin to look at how organizations are innovating, there's a lot of focus on creativity, how to generate ideas, idea sessions with Post-it notes everywhere, making prototypes. Prototypes are really good. It allows you to learn lots of things. Also piloting, to do a little test to see if it works. However, the real problem when I look at companies big and small is that they don't put enough effort on scale. Now, this will mean that we find they don't design for scale. And the second piece that we'll get into is that when they have their designs, when they made their things, they don't scale their design. So we're going to look at these two pieces of scaling. So what is scaling? So let's again define this. So when we look at scaling, we look at how do you grow key performance metrics. Now that could be sales, but it may be other things that you consider to be very important. How do you grow these things in a non-linear way so that it's not 1 + 1 + 1, it's 1 + 10 + 100 and you grow. Now, growth is not a synonym for scaling. Growth can be sort of linear growth. Growth could be whatever, 0.5% a year. Scaling is therefore very special. It is this non-linear growth where it grows dramatically quickly. And when we look at then how you grow, we describe the method as being small, smart moves. This means that you systematically work out tactics, elements of strategies that you can put in place to help your business grow or your product revenues grow dramatically with relatively little effort. Any questions so far? Again, happy to take any questions. Okay,
So we're good with this, Mark, that we've started with innovation and scaling. A lot of entrepreneurship students and early stage startups are the audience of this today's session. So if you can keep this in mind that we're talking to entrepreneurship students and early stage startups. So we have to really deconstruct things to make it easy for people to digest.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Well, and as I go through this, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build things up piece by piece rather than just jumping in. Because also, I don't know all of the questions that you guys have.
Right.
Well, and I'll give you an example of a scaling project. And I'm deliberately going to give you an example that's not a business example. Because otherwise you're saying, well, my business is different. My business like this. I'm going to give you an example of a crazy idea that a philanthropist had. He wanted to change the world teaching. And he wanted specifically to create role models for teachers that they look as cool as cricket stars or football stars. So the Varkey family created have a charity called the Varkey Foundation, and they decided to make a $1 million prize for the world's best teacher. So $1 million world's best teacher. Now it will be paid over 10 years, $100,000 per year. And so right now, 40,000 people plus are nominated. Some thousands then go through to the next stage. There's a process that I designed that helps find the top 50 from different places around the world, that helps find a top 10. So there's a voting process. And then eventually the top 10 get voted on by a panel of celebrities, judges, pretty much like the Oscars. And then finally there's one winner gets a $1 million prize. Well, this is designed as a scaling project. For example, when this was designed, one scaling tactic that we used was the tactic on networks. Now, this will be very important. We'll get into some of these things when we talk about your own projects, but the concept of networks is that everybody exists in networks. So right now, this is a network of people studying this business degree. There'll be people that are alumni from the school. If you're in a domain, let's say you're a dentist, I'm sure that there is a national Pakistan dental association, and that may even be a member of an international association. So there's a national level of dentists and an international level of dentists. Within dentistry, you might have some people that make dental implants that have also got a network and an association. And then they may be part of a wider healthcare system network, but it just means everybody exists in networks. Well, one of the very quick hijack mechanisms, the sort of very ways of getting out very, very quickly, is leveraging these networks at scale. Now, and here, I'm specifically not saying this is only technology. I'm saying these are human networks, the way that humans connect. It's just that many of these networks are actually driven and implemented on technology. So LinkedIn is a network, it's a social network. However, LinkedIn per se isn't a brilliant network. But when you have a professional association on LinkedIn, that means you can reach out to them super fast. Well, when I was looking at designing this Global Teacher Prize, we realized that there were many teacher prizes that existed around the world. If you like, there was a network of teacher prizes. So we created this network of teacher prizes, or brought people together to say, hey, can you ask your finalists over the last few years to nominate themselves? This means that we already had the best in different countries, all nominating themselves into the best of the region, best of the best. In addition, within teaching, there are teachers' unions, there are associations of geography teachers. And so we explicitly did some desk research, so straight off Google, just typing in a teacher association and just typing in the name of the country. And we went through a list of 100, almost 200 of them, to contact all of them in the very first year of the prize, when nobody had heard of the prize. Remember, we hadn't even had a single winner to saying, hi, can you use your network to share this message? And that worked extremely well. The next thing in the Global Teacher Prize that we use, is just examples of what we call scaling frames, just ways of doing scaling. It's called a network hub. The concept in a network hub is that not everybody is equal within a network or a community. Some people are more popular than others. Some people are more followed than others. And what you're trying to do is you try to find these hubs. Now, a hub could be, for example, a school or a professor that runs an event. This is like a little hub that has been created here. Well, you've also got some specialties, like types of hubs, which are celebrities. So I don't know if you know a comedian called Trevor Noah from South Africa, and he's now in the United States. But so Trevor Noah was the celebrity who, I think it was last year, was the one who gave out the prizes. Well, because it's Trevor Noah, he has a following of millions and people follow. In fact, with the Global Teacher Prize, I think it was 4 years ago, the person that was giving out the prize was Pope Francis. Well, everybody has heard of Pope Francis, even if they so he's very, very well known. And from his work in Argentina, he had a commitment, he had a charity called Scholars. So the thing then is that we're sort of hijacking that person's reputation and that person's network to bring it into our project. Again, this is for the $1 million prize for the world's best teacher. Another thing that we have is, how do you use the power of the crowd? Now, we can talk a little bit later about how to be a leader, like a small business leader, a startup leader. I like this concept of being confident and humble. As a leader, we must pretty much know what we're doing. However, we should be humble in that we don't know everything, and we never could. And even if we could even do everything, it doesn't make sense. We'd never get any sleep. We'd just be panicked all the time. So another thing that is then very, very powerful when we look at scaling is, how do we tap into the power of the crowd? How can we make use of everybody? In the case of the Global Teacher Prize, how do we find the world's best teacher? I mean, that's a great question. Well, already by having celebrities allows us to do broadcast, by having some advertising in Facebook and a lot of the key publications, like the Times Education Supplement is a hub in that sort of teaching world. We were able to get 30,000 people applying by using the crowd. And those people, let's say they were nominating teachers, and then the teachers themselves would have to apply and hand in all their documentation. So we use the crowd to find the best teachers. But in addition to that, we now have, in the first year, I think it was 20,000 applications, and we have 5 weeks to do the first few filters of evaluation so that we can have a really good quality top 50 representing different countries around the world and different teaching things around the world, when people have been allowed to submit in 8 different languages. So this is a tricky problem. Well, we did have some AI to help scale this, so we can use data and modeling to help us scale as well. Technology is very useful. But we also then crowdsourced the judging as well. We actually had a special test mechanism for people that were education experts, so they could consistently evaluate all of the teachers coming in. But what it meant was that we're able to go from 20,000 original nominations and applications down to 50 within about 5 weeks, with a very good audit trail so that we can know exactly who was decided on and when. And the audit trail is published by PricewaterhouseCoopers, so that we can have confidence that, yes, we really do have the best ones here. We did a consistently good job. That makes it scale after those 5 weeks. And the other thing as well that we did was building up a community. Communities become very, very powerful. Some people will love you much more than other people. And this is the same whether you're a startup with a ride-sharing app, whether you're doing food delivery services, whatever it is, some of your customers will be really deep into this. So in the case of the Varkey Prize, we took explicit efforts to help design case of the Varkey Prize. What we could do is have a community of super teachers. After all, they've gone through a process where every year 50 of them become the top 50 in that particular area in that year. So we created something called the Varkey Teacher Ambassadors. Now, what is interesting as well in terms of scaling, we didn't just say, congratulations, you're in the top 50, you're now you're a teacher ambassador. We instead said, we would like to invite you to be an ambassador. You can say no if you want, but if you do say yes, you get an opportunity to maybe go to the Harvard Kennedy School to do extra education. We have a special education budget where 2 or 3 of you can combine together to do a new project, and we can fund up to $50,000 for that. So we have many benefits of you being an ambassador. We may also help give you media training so that you can go and promote education in your country. But it's a choice for you. And like I stopped doing it after a couple of years, but pretty much I think only one person ever declined being a member of it because they were too busy, but everybody else said yes. But these are, let's say, things that were done for a non-profit prize that we could then start applying to your business applications. Because if I get into this thing now, and we'll go back to the screen a little bit later, what we find is that...
Mark?
Sure.
Mark?
Yes.
I've included this slide in all of my entrepreneurship lectures, especially at Air University, and in all of our incubation programs as well. So people are familiar with this slide.
Very good. Well, it also means that if people have any questions on the slide that they don't know how things work or they'd like to get more into that, I'm very, very happy to take these questions. But because this for me, this slide, if you like, sort of, it captures everything in a single slide, which is always very nice. Because what we find in general, and I can't remember, if I just sort of talk briefly about these 3 areas of emergence, networks, and waves. The one thing that is very interesting with scaling is that, well, linear thinking does not work in a non-linear world. What's happened, and particularly now, if we look in times of COVID, clearly A, B, C, D does a nice little logic to this. If you had a business in 2019, it was obvious what 2020 and 21 would look like. But what happens is that sometimes things happen that change everything, really change everything. And in fact, I'm writing a new book right now, and maybe this might be for another session, on how to see differently, a new lens of seeing the world. Because what happens is that sometimes everything changes. Even if they don't have a situation where everything changed, sometimes things just bubble up that could change everything. We call this emergence. So this looks at complex systems. It's not necessary to get into, let's say, the complexity around them, but things just sort of pop up and emerge. But within there, you've also got this concept of networks. The way to think of this is that when people join a network or an association, you need to know who to connect to. And it's much easier to connect to people that are kind of like you. So if you're a new student and you're queuing up at the beginning, if there's a group of the business students and there's a group of the engineering students, you'll probably hang out with the business students because they're more like you than the engineering students. And that's a network. As a student, maybe you really liked boating, like you liked rowing. Well, then you're in a little network of the people that like rowing. What you find is that you naturally, in almost all systems, have these networks being created. The reason why it's very interesting with scaling is that networks allow you to dramatically accelerate the spread of messages and actions through human systems and other systems because they're in networks. We could talk about that. And the last big concept is the concept of waves. And there really, this idea is that there's energy sloshing around in a human system. Now I can call it human energy, the will, the ambition that some people have to go and do stuff. We can also look at energy in our system that we have as money. So money also sloshes around. But what's interesting then is that we can take advantage of these energies sort of moving around and tap into them like waves. So you can imagine now riding a wave, catching a wave. So there's a whole bunch of scaling methods around what we can do to tap into that energy to make it work for our advantage. Now, I'll actually go back to the slide a little bit later as we go into having conversations, and we'll go back to the slide for the Q&A. Just thinking about this thing, and because you're more on the startup side, but it's worthwhile thinking about when you look at, I mentioned earlier that we have scaling. So one is, how do you scale how do you design for scale? So that when you make your thing, how can you make it big? And then once you have your thing, how do you then scale it? Back to this. And what's quite interesting is that there are different ways of scaling it. So I don't know, how many of you are more on the engineering side or the manufacturing side? And how many of you much were into consumer products?
Mostly people are from consumer products because they are entrepreneurship, business school students and startups.
So I won't go into this thing in too much depth, but I'll give you a little sort of vision about, let's say, how we can begin to think about the use of technology and we can have to scale. So one way that engineering companies have been scaling, as an example, is making a digital twin. It's quite expensive to have a physical product, but what you can do is you can make a digital product. So you have the specifications, the tolerances, the materials, and this is a twin of the physical product, but it exists in the digital space. Well, this then gives you lots of scaling potential. You can then share your digital twin around the world immediately, so you don't have to wait for it to be shipped. I looked at a very interesting scaling project, and this was now quite a few years ago when Unilever had a packaging group, and their packaging expertise were in London, I think Hong Kong, and some in the US. Well, they also very early on in investing in 3D printers, like really early on. What they found was that when they would make designs of a new sort of object that you could remove and spin around, sure, they could have this as just a mock-up on screen. But what they began to do is they would tie it into how they did their marketing and market research. So they bring consumers into whether it's Las Vegas or New York or Hong Kong. And then they would get customers to play with physical mock-ups of physical, like mayonnaise jars and new types of ketchup. And what they would do is that they would use the sort of power of digital, power of technology to create the mock-ups digitally. And then they press a button. And then overnight in all of the locations where they needed to, they would print copies of these things, the physical things, and then immediately do a market research group to get feedback on the physical object. In the past, they would have to FedEx it. And we now know, at least in today's world, that it's really, really hard to get products shipped in today's world. But thinking about how we scale this thing, we don't have to be wedded to business as is. There are some challenges to scaling. We'll get back to the other ones. So some people, and particularly a lot of startups, you want to scale systems. Now, this is an example from, this is, I think, Austria. This is Switzerland, on how do you scale charging of electric vehicles. Well, sometimes your business idea that you have is a big idea. It's a huge, really good idea. However, to make that idea work, you need a lot of time. And quite often for a small business, it's impossible. It's really, really hard for you to do this unless you're part of an ecosystem of other people. So right now, this was looking at an example about how do you scale the electric vehicle charging systems. Well, it's quite a lot of work. So just things to think about. Here's another idea. Now, this is an opportunity for us that are technologists to see that we have a business opportunity. But if we look at, let's say, how do we build capacity to scale? This is an interesting case that I still like. Now, this is just it's a few years old now, 3 years old. But so JP Morgan have a software group, and I met the woman who was running it. And they decided that they really had to invest in artificial intelligence. And they were looking at repetitive tasks that had very high value, but they had to employ lots of people doing it. And they had one division which was doing contract laws for a certain type of financial product. And they found that it took about 400 lawyers a year to run this particular department. It's a lot of legal hours. Well, the AI that was built was trying to work out, well, how do we write these contracts? And how can we have the AI handle 90% plus of the contracts and only the special cases get reviewed properly by the lawyers? After 2 years, they were able to turn the machine on, and it was fascinating how it worked. Immediately then, so again, this is good news for us as business people on the technology side, the technology was able to review a contract and take the process of reviewing a contract from 3 hours down to 30 seconds. Sorry, I didn't mean 3 hours. What a mistake. 3 weeks. The average turnaround time to complete a contract was 3 weeks. Now it was 30 seconds for the bulk of the contracts. The quality of the contracts had also improved dramatically because they were consistent. And what it meant was that the 10% of lawyers, the 40 or so lawyers that are still there, were then able to hand to fix them, and then everything else was automated. The cost saving of this thing is at least $40 million per year, at a cost of around $5 billion to make the system. And what it meant was over 3 years, this particular division of JP Morgan is making 100 million worth of profit. Big scale from a small investment. But what's also interesting then is that this capacity within JP Morgan could be used for other parts of the bank, because quite quickly everybody else wants to have the same thing. So the implication then is, particularly on this technology side, that we can build some technology building blocks that will allow us to scale in many different ways. This is just an example of AI, but we'll find with being practical about, let's say, building businesses today, that there are many foundational capacity building technologies that we can have that make it really easy for us to do big things quickly. Now, some of these examples aren't so much, I'll give you some big ones and then we can get into the specifics, and we'll do that much more as a Q&A style. But I was giving an example, I quite like this. This is a big bank, but they've realized that they need to be innovative and they need to invest in scaling. One of the things that I quite like is their API marketplace. So they didn't put this on the blockchain. They realized, though, that there are many fintechs that need integration pieces. And what BBVA Bank, headquartered in Spain, did was that they looked at all of their banking products, all of their banking brands, and they worked out which pieces could be componentized. It could be therefore plugged into other people's systems, whether it's an insurance system, a cash management system, a treasury system. And so then this is a marketplace. And they have, other thing that they had in here was design ambassadors. And then this is, I don't, on your program, do you do design thinking at all?
Yes, Mark, we are heavily, we really focus on design thinking. We spend like 4 to 5 weeks on design thinking.
Excellent. Well, so, and BBVA have invested the same. So you can see up here, you have the design ambassador program, because it turns out you need to build skills. These are not natural skills. These aren't things where you just wake up one morning and magically know design thinking. You won't magically know what a customer journey is. So they've invested, again, in teaching people at massive scale, and lifelong learning. So they have their campus as well for lifelong learning for the staff. So these are things where they're really able to test, prototype, and then make sure they can actually scale things. I think it's also that there's a sort of type of unusual thinking we can have in scaling. I quite like this one. So my father used to work at Massey Ferguson a long time ago. So I've always had a nice love for tractors. And so, but what's interesting with even tractors, a very physical product, is you can see how quickly it becomes digital and virtualized. I remember when I was in my first year of my PhD work, so I was like 21 years old, I was doing work on digital technologies and I was helping my professor write a book. What was interesting then is that my Massey Ferguson had one of the world's first combine harvesters with a GPS in it. And it was tracking data about where it was doing its harvesting, where it was planting seeds. And it was creating data maps, whereas before we just had a factory in a field and grain. So this I find super interesting, because then it allows you to ultimately have automated robots doing it. You don't need people, it can work all night, and then. Even to the extent, as I was looking at for scaling, so how do you scale customer service? So this is from an insurance company in the US from about a year ago I was looking at, where they have an AI listening to the voices of people making telephone calls. So you're calling into customer service. And what is happening is that the AI is picking up from the customer the words they say, the tension, the speed of words, anxiety levels. And there's an AI giving immediate guidance to the call center person on how to answer the phone better. So that's quite fun. I was even just looking at, I've just been writing a brand new course on how to speed research anything. But it's been very interesting looking again about how things scale. Amazon is a remarkable business in that it used to have books as its main thing, books and CDs. But right now its cloud business means that it's actually managing the data of many, many companies all around the world. And you begin to see how some of these business with scale of customers are able to leverage that to go into new business areas completely. So I'm just waiting for the new Amazon Healthcare service to start existing. So I'll finish off this and then we'll go back to the framework for questions. Some things that are generally interesting that are important when you look at scaling. So one is to have a concept of a product manager. So if you like, and even this means you're a small business and the product manager is you, which it usually is in all of my cases, this product manager function, you're trying to say, well, a product isn't just what it does. It's not just a set of features. It may be its features plus what it integrates with. It might be how it looks. The product manager thinks about, well, who is the market for this? The product manager has also got a concept of revenue, like what is actually, where does the money get generated? So that allows me to decide where things go. But it's also got this notion of dedicated focus, because it's very hard to make things happen by accident. It can happen, but you're much better off, let's say, having some discipline around how you decide to package a product and scale this product instead of waiting for happy accidents. The next thing that is very interesting is this use of networks that I've discussed a lot, and also the concept of ecosystems. So like you'll be in eventually with your startups, I visited some of the incubators, and thank you very much, Imran, for inviting me to the incubators in Islamabad. Much appreciated. But it's very interesting that
you again.
I should have been there in March.
Yeah,
but due to this COVID. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So there are networks that exist. So you have the local networks and local ecosystems, but you also then have larger networks. You have networks which are, let's say, networks of networks. So there are other incubator systems. There's things like, I don't know, is there an impact hub in Pakistan?
Yes, there are a few, not really developed, but emerging things. Things are emerging.
So what happens with the Impact Hub, this is more for NGOs and social businesses, but there's a whole network of Impact Hubs around the world.
Yeah.
So, this means then that for the work that you're doing, it makes sense to be the lone, like there's a logic to be the lone hero, the sort of super business person, just it's all you, and that's fine. And it probably is going to happen anyway. The thing, though, is that you can take advantage of networks and ecosystems to help you do this. Now, at the end, it's still you. So nobody's going to sort of super help you. You still have to make the effort yourself. But by making special use of ecosystems and networks as well, personal networks, professional networks, industry networks, you can scale your stuff much faster. Another thing then is then how do we build this notion of communities, let's say our own little ecosystem? Because then we're not just reliant on ourselves, but we have more people who want to help us. I did an interesting project when I was at my software company. We did a many eyes and ears project for the Gap. The Gap wanted to find out about all kinds of cool shop displays across America. Well, you could send a marketing team out to do this, but instead they gave their employees 1 week across the Gap to say, hey, can you just take pictures and upload the pictures of cool displays and just tag it with where you found it and why you like it? And that meant that within a week, without leaving their offices in San Francisco, the Gap marketing team was able to be everywhere instantly. But this is then by leveraging your workforce, treating them more as a community, that like, please, can you help us out doing this? And like, it gives you just more stuff. Then you have the notion of partnerships. So again, you don't have to do everything yourself. We saw even with the bank that they have APIs and their networks, their systems plug into other people's systems. So right now it's very interesting to look at what do you need to do yourself? We call this balancing control. What do you need to do yourself and what other people can do for you? Then we particularly look at, and you can see this, if you've ever had the potential misfortune to go to McDonald's, or it might be a great thing. What's interesting with McDonald's is that there is some variability in the different places around the world. However, it's standardized. There is a McDonald's manual, there is a logo. So one of the things that you find when companies really begin to scale is that once you baked your product or service, you can then standardize the key pieces. That makes it much easier to train people. It makes it easier to hire people to come into your business. So what you're trying to do is that once you've got product market fit, you try to standardize and then repeat, because that's where you really get your money from. And then the final thought from the scaling piece then is you need to have a plan. Scaling is not a process of magic. And you can take advantage of good fortune. However, it's not a magic thing. So right now, the very best companies, whether they're small companies, they have whatever concepts like growth hacking would be a scaling thing. And they do it deliberately. Happy accidents do happen, but it means that if you're doing things deliberately, particularly if you have your product manager or your networks, you're able to see these opportunities when they pop up and immediately go for them. But it's better to have a plan than let things happen by magic. So that was it, and then I was going to go to back to my original slide. I don't have a glass of water where I'm at, and I have because it's not in a lecture theatre room. I need to go and get a glass of water.
Sure, please.
But so once we finish that, we're going to go back to where's it gone to? This slide here. Okay, so I should just be back in just 1 minute.
Yeah.
I'm just going to rush in. Okay,
sure.
Any questions, please, from anyone? Anybody who wants to ask any question? Any questions, please? Samya, हमारे पास कोई questions है Facebook पे? Sure, please, sure. See if there is any question and you can ask on someone's behalf. If there is any question on Facebook or any social media. Just for the audience, Mark was my professor of strategy at Hult. Ji sir. Yes.
I have a question on creating the momentum, creating waves.
Let him come.
Yes. Meantime, just fill this time slot. Mark was my professor, and I really love scaling. I enjoy listening to him every time. He has visited Pakistan twice, and I attended every single lecture with him. And once we arranged workshops for him in Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, I traveled with him, spent a week with him, really enjoyed. I'm a fan of scaling because that's what every startup needs to do. So at some point, you need to scale your product. The moment you achieve product market fit, the next challenge is scaling. And that's where Mark is really marvelous. He's really wonderful.
Thank you very much. I'm back.
So students, please get ready with your questions. So meanwhile, Mark, as they're getting ready for the questions, can you tell us something like what is the right time to scale up?
So what is the right time? So it makes no sense to scale up before your product market fit is ready. So if you are, so you need signals from the market to tell you that the product is ready or that the service is ready. And particularly now, if we look at whatever in the COVID world, it may be that the signals were perfect in January, But right now, maybe those signals have stopped working. And so you'll need to reflect. So there are many companies that I've worked with recently that have to stop scaling because they can't scale. So just the situation changes. So you need product market fit. Now, does everybody know what product market fit is?
Yes, we covered that extensively, Mark. The 3 phases of startup journey. Yeah.
Very good. So once you have the product market fit, then you know people like this, that they're willing to pay this money, and these are the people that like it. So at this point, then you need to scale. Now, the thing though for scale up is that you should have designed your product to be able to scale once it hits product market fit. Now, what does this mean? This may mean, for example, that when you created your product right from the very beginning, that you had a user group community as part of it. Because that is my chart here, where to go to. This is a community thing. Community development is one of the things in networks. So right now, if you'd already, when you designed your initial service, you were thinking about having a community. It's much easier when you have a community at the beginning to scale than it is to put it in afterwards. So designing for the ability to scale is a good thing when you're spending your time thinking. But then when you're actually thinking about how do we scale up the design, that's when you need to do post-market fit. The other thing is that when you look at scale, I mean, then it just comes into the practicalities of being in business. So sometimes you need capital. Well, then you need to work out, well, do I need to borrow the money? Do I need to get it from equity? Do I get grants? Can I get my customers to front pay? So I was very fortunate with Imaginatic, my first business. It was fortunate on purpose. We got about $300,000 from Bristol Myers Squibb, one of our first customers, for our very first product iteration. They gave us $80,000 to do a pilot project, and this is for a software product to collect ideas from their employees. And they liked it so much, they said they wanted certain features, but they didn't want to own the software because they're a drug company. So they gave us $200,000, and they basically paid for the development of our software. So I think particularly if you look at, let's say, scaling in a post-COVID world, you need to get really creative about, like, where does money come from? Where can you actually sort of, where can you do things? Like, how can you do things? Thank you very much for the other questions. So, I mean, I can take these questions as they come in.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, we mentioned when to scale up. I did also, I mean, if I just say sort of why would you stop scaling up? This is a very important question right now. So the thing is that when you scale, it's hard. So I took my first company public in 2006. 2008 was a recession, and we had about 5 of our big customers go bankrupt. One of the challenges when you start to scale and grow your business is you need to spend money before you get the new money in. Quite often for many businesses. So this is high risk. And at the moment, because everything is completely uncertain, it's really, really high risk to do things now. This means it's risky for you personally as an entrepreneur. It's risky for banks to lend money, investors to lend money. So until we really know what's going on, there's going to be lots of things that are high risk. However, what it should do is put you in a creative frame of mind, because it means you can't solve the problem with money. You need to solve the problem with brain power, your brain power and everybody else around you. So it's thinking that can get you out of this thing, not necessarily money. And then you need to be creative. So let's look at this question of how to scale a tech startup. So already then you need to work out, is my company designed to be able to scale anyway?
That means designing for scale.
Correct. And let's look at a most extreme example. Let's imagine that you have a business where you want to teach, you have a corporate training business. You want to go out to companies and have 20 people in a room and you want to teach them things. And this was going to be your business. Well, because of social distancing and maybe that type of business won't work anymore. So now we have a business where already scaling was hard because to do twice as many trainings, you need twice as many, you might have capacity of the individuals teaching. So, but there's certain businesses now that can't scale because of the situation we're in for the next 18 months or 2 years. So these are fundamental things to think about, is that can you even scale? And if you can't scale, this should be your wake-up call to rethink your business. And it's a wake-up call, because then otherwise you'll be spending 2 years trying desperately to get your business working. Nothing will work. You're spending lots of money and not getting a return. You still have employees and you have no business for them to do because it just doesn't want to scale. And I see many businesses that cannot scale. Now, they could be successful. And so now it's important when we talk about for scaling, we're talking about businesses that want to scale or should scale. We're not talking about a sculptor that makes beautiful sculptures. We're not talking about that. But if they wanted to scale that sculpture thing, there are ways of scaling it. But so, assuming that we first of all need to say, can you scale? The next thing is that, particularly if you're in Pakistan, your local market is not big enough to have a fantastically good business. It's not bad. You have 200 million people, but you don't have a lot of disposable. So you begin to start thinking about what other English-speaking markets might there be that you can go after. I think it's very interesting looking at Estonia and Sweden, particularly around Sweden. Sweden creates $1 billion company every year and has done for over a decade, but they're not making their money in Sweden, they're making their money internationally. So I think if I was looking in Pakistan to have a tech startup, you need to think internationally from day one. You need to remember that your market isn't Pakistan. It might be, you can test it, but you need to get money overseas, particularly if your currency is quite low. Overseas money is very valuable. The next thing, and particularly if we look at now, I don't know how many of you have ever gone through a recession before, but recessions are brutal, really nasty. Some general rules: protect your cash, assume that you'll never have the cash ever again. So try to avoid spending anything is a good thing. But once you have this, you need to be very nimble about what your customers, and there are many businesses that used to be sellers. The poor buyer would be screwed because there's only one seller, and whatever the seller says, everybody accepts it. Or that things were going so well, the buyers just bought everything. It didn't really matter. But when money is tight for everybody, you need to be extremely customer-centric. Now, what tends to happen for scaling, and this is I use this, the area is called emergent solutions. What it means then is that you might find that your product is already, you have some traction with some customers, but you might discover, I then spend a little bit of time with your existing customers to see who's giving you more money than everybody else, who seems to be more loyal than everybody else, who is using it more than everybody else, and try to understand them. Because maybe you just found what's called a niche, and this is also, it's called leveraging adjacencies. It's in my book. So what it means is that you might have a really profitable niche. Maybe you have a bunch of retail banks that are buying your product and they're willing to pay 4 times more money than everybody else. But maybe they need a couple of extra features that you didn't think were so important. But doing this extra work can show this is where your money, this is where let the money speak. The money says, please do more of this, and so do more of that. So you really need to, if you like, let's say, keep rebalancing your product market fit because of this change in situation. Okay. Who would invest in you?
So Imran Hamid had a question.
Yeah, of course.
Sure. Imran Sahab, can you go ahead?
So nice, Ji. Marks, so nice of you to have, so nice to have you with us. You gave a lot of insights. You said that the 3 elements of innovation are the emergence, and there was another factor, and then was a factor of gaining momentum. Could you just explain to us what you mean by gaining momentum and how to ride the wave? How best to ride the wave? Is timing everything?
So in scaling, the area is called waves, and we have catching the wave. We have unleashing the wave, catching the wave, and riding the wave. So unleashing a wave is, let's say, relatively rare, but unleashing a wave says that there's a pent-up demand in the systems to do something, and you just happen to be right product, right place, and it just goes whoosh. Examples of that would have been food delivery, that even now we've seen it even more successful with food delivery, and that would be unleashing a wave. Catching a wave is a little bit different. Catching a wave says the wave exists, and maybe it's been started in the United States or another country, and therefore you're just going to basically jump on and catch the same wave as everybody else is doing, but maybe a little bit faster. Now, I think Pakistan already has many of these companies which are copycat companies, but that's completely fine. You can make a lot of money successful as a copycat. Courts. There's not enough money there. But it means that you can build product out relatively cheaply. You can build customer feedback relatively cheaply. And then if you then are thought about international expansion, you go over to them. Now, riding a wave is those companies that seem to be successful every 6 months, every year. They're trying to follow trends, like they get a good understanding of what's going to happen next. They look at how they can, like typically, if there's going to be an Olympics, we need a sports-related thing. You do see this with COVID, that there are many companies now that have become COVID companies, and then they're the social distancing company. All of those things are examples of firms trying to keep riding the wave. Now, the other thing within scaling in my book is called building to a crescendo. And this actually says that it's one of the best things to do is build your scaling plan over time. So let's say you map out a 2-year scaling plan, and therefore you have 8 quarters, so Q1 through to Q8, and you have quarters, and you work out which things you'll do in which quarter to see how these things go up a bit, go up a bit, go up a bit. So you design your scaling activities over time. So that allows you to build momentum and to take advantage of good things that are happening in sort of this quarter that allows you to do the next quarter and the next quarter. So there's some other examples.
So you have to review your business model almost every day.
Oh, well, actually, very, very interesting. So, I mean, as the CEO of the company with 40 employees, I did not do that because this actually gets into a very interesting challenge for leadership and how leaders work within their team. If you as a leader are constantly changing your mind every day, your staff are confused, they think you don't have any direction, and they get annoyed with you. Okay. So one of the good ideas that you have is that I would do my business planning around every 3 months, even if I personally was looking at things happening maybe every month. The other is that as your business begins to scale, so with a 40-employee business, and I had customers in many different countries, what I would do is I would spend like an established business, I would spend 1 month on one topic as a focus area for myself as CEO and as the business development director, just to make sure that we were constantly improving across the whole business every year. Because what you find is that there's a limited capacity of a company to innovate. And if you innovate too quickly, your company just rejects it and they don't follow. So this is the balancing act you need to do. However, right now, but so if I was in a business situation right now, I would need to make certain planning assumptions about the next year. And I would need to make my planning assumptions based on worst case, not best case. So I wouldn't listen to Donald Trump saying that there's going to be a vaccine ready on Tuesday, because that makes no sense. So then I might need to think, well, okay, even if we have a vaccine, it's not going to be in Pakistan for 100 million people until 2023, maybe. Yeah. So right now, this means that I need to assume that this situation is going to be here for at least 18 months and have this as a planning concept. That might mean that I have less money than I think, therefore I need to negotiate with my staff to get cheaper salaries, those kind of things. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. As Andy Grove said, that if you want to run a huge business, you have to be absolutely pessimistic about it. About the he gave a new term on that.
I did meet Andy Grove. So Intel was my first ever employer. So I grew up the Intel way.
Okay, that's nice.
And they're a great company to work for. Really, really good. There's a question here. Who would invest in us currently in our country project? Tricky. And I think everybody is going to have trouble finding investors because you have major corporations. I mean, you'll have most of Pakistan's big companies will not have been working for 4 months, 6 months. Lufthansa had 800 planes. Maybe they'll fly 300 planes. Hotel business. I don't know. I mean, to some extent, Pakistan was lucky in that you didn't have a tourism industry. Not yet. So you don't have, you're not like a country like Greece that has 30% of its GDP tied to tourism, and there's no tourists. So there are, let's say, some advantages that you have. I think then it's this, I mean, I really have just been writing this brand new book on how to see the world differently, because you have to think really differently. It's all the rules have changed, and it's very hard. Everybody would like to. I mean, so let's say it was 2019. I'm giving you advice as startups. Then I would say join some international startup competitions to see if you can get placed. See if you can use your diaspora to have a member of your team in, let's say, sitting in Stockholm or sitting in San Francisco that can be part of your team. And then you can submit through that route. That might allow you to get more international money to come in. So these are ways that used to work. I don't know what's going to work in the future. I don't know yet. It's going to be really strange. In general, though, prepare to live with the money that you have and be really creative about everything. And if you have cash in the bank, trying to work out where you're spending money and make that number to be zero, because that makes you prepared for whichever way things need to go.
Great. So, Mark, our student Anam Gul wants to ask the question. Anam, go ahead.
So my question is that you said that in the current situation, if we need to scale our technological project or startup, we should reinvest in the current time rather than planning ahead. We should reinvest in our current startup. So, sir, if we're doing tech scaling, so wouldn't it be that our startup or our idea might become obsolete till the time this virus ends?
So there's a few things. So this virus will only, so the impact of the virus on Pakistan will only end hopefully in about 2022, maybe 23.
So wouldn't our idea be prolonged? Our startup would be so prolonged. We need to start it up like when we end our degree, but it would take us so long to start up.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting. So I started the business called Imaginatic when I was 24, when I was doing my PhD. And originally I was doing consulting for corporates. Then I began to do competitive intelligence for corporates. Then I got into executive management reporting systems and building IT for those. But nobody wanted to give us lots of money apart from one customer. And then I started building idea management systems. And it was those idea management systems that allowed me to go public, not the other 4 businesses that I did beforehand. So you will have learned pivoting. So this means your business does something slightly different. Right now, it is very likely that you'll need to, so it's called seeding optionality in the scaling book, but it pretty much means I have no idea what's going to work. Let's just make sure that I have enough money, time, and resources that if I can see what works, we start doing that. Because let's say it's relatively, well, and I think where you're at right now is that if you haven't started your business now and you'd be waiting 6 months, in 6 months, something else will come up.
Exactly.
And one of the challenges that many new entrepreneurs face is that they think that a company is a baby. Now, a company is not a baby. It's a legal entity. Like, I mean, I mean, I have two lovely children, so I know what babies are like. They're angels and they're monsters from hell. Now they're bigger monsters, but businesses aren't like that. And if you have a business where, I mean, I've had businesses, my big company, when I had one of my clients went bankrupt and they owed us $200,000. Where's the money? Yeah. So it's just that you need to really, I like building businesses based on what customers want. And I like businesses as well, which are driven by revenue, not by investor money. Because you've got to work out, where does the money come from? Because I think in this day and age, if you're setting up a business now, you need to work out, where do I get cash from and where can I get profitable from? Now, it may be that you have, I mean, the thing is that every business is different. So there's general advice and there's specific advice. And so generally everybody does this, but specifically for your business, you might actually want to do something different. So I don't know specifically for your idea what you have, but I just suggest thinking it through, getting feedback from customers. But very good question.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else with a question?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Samya.
Sir, I want to ask that today everyone is almost facing COVID-19, but Pakistan specifically will take a lot of time to cope with this problem. So who will gonna invest in our country?
So, and if you look at, let's say, if we ignored COVID and you asked the same question a year ago, who is going to invest? So now when you say invest, are you saying this from a macroeconomic policy perspective, such as the World Bank type of thing? Or are you thinking much more angel investment into a small business?
Yeah, she's talking about angel investments and institutional investments.
Okay, so that makes... So the thing is that, I mean, there will be massive amounts of money sloshing around the world economy. Massive, because the world's central banks are creating money and it's giving it to banks, and they're so desperate to avoid a depression that there will be lots of money sloshing around. The concept that I have is that I call it fish where the fish are. If you want to go after a certain type of fish, find out where the fish swim and then sit in the middle and eat them.
Right.
Now, what would this mean? This means that in Germany, for example, they have a special fund supporting German tech companies and startups. So already people that I knew were starting to apply for these things as soon as they came out, because there will be money and grant money and other things available. So you just need to, I mean, you can do this collectively. So within a group, you can find out, well, okay, what are the grants or requests open? And then you can see how you can get some money from it. It may even be that your school is able to say, well, can you please give us a pot of money to manage? And we will manage grants of some sort of smaller amounts. That's an idea for you to go play with. Particularly, it may be that as an institution, you have more credibility. And as an organization that has done before, you have more credibility than an individual might do. Because the other problem with this large amounts of money flopping around is that sometimes it's either way too little or way too much. And you always want something in between.
Great advice, Mark.
So that is, but very good question as well.
Anybody? Ji, Samya, please ask the question. Please go ahead.
Any control मेरे पास नहीं है. मैंने वीडियो बंद की.
Yes, we can hear you now, Samya.
So if you think about some things, so I think products or services that help implement social distancing will be very popular. So already I know that in Germany, there's a lack of acrylic and perspex panels. So that means that as shops need to refit themselves, they need equipment to refit themselves. You end up with things like contactless payments. So if you think through the customer journey about how social distancing can be implemented, you begin to see that there'll be solutions based on this social distancing thing. And now remember, this is important because unless you've had COVID and have recovered, you have no immunity to COVID. And this just means that until we have a vaccine, and in some developing countries, this might take 3 or 4 years for it to come, you will be coping with this thing for a long time. And whether you're in Tokyo, Japan, or in Dubai, or in Kampala, it's all the same stuff. We all have to cope with this thing. I think then other things that are interesting is that, think through some really good advice, think through the customer journey of social distancing. Now, in Berlin right now, Berlin is now open, and I went to have my hair cut, finally. So if we'd have had this thing earlier, I would have had a big afro. When I was there needs to be a wait list, because I can't just walk into the shop, so you need wait list apps, would make sense. Say, hi, I've got a reservation for 2 o'clock in the afternoon to go into the store. But before, maybe this was into, like, say, exclusive hair salons, but now I might need a wait list to go into a cheese shop. So wait list apps are interesting tech. You look at contact tracking, because one of the ways that public health authorities can allow things to open up is by tracking who goes where, so that if somebody gets infected, they can work out who else was there and warn them.
Yes.
The way that contact tracking works in my hairdressers is that we just wrote down on a sheet. No data protection, no anything. So contact tracking applications became interesting. So I think if you want to make money now, things that help implement social distancing is one. But the concept behind implementing social distancing is, one is public health. The other one is, how do you help businesses make money faster? What might this mean? This might mean that right now a restaurant is told that it can only have 30% capacity, which means that likely it only has 30% of its revenue. But if you can work out ways to allow that restaurant to go from 30% capacity to 60% capacity, that's doubling its revenue.
Great point, Mark.
So I think there'll be some very interesting business opportunities, particularly once this thing is baselined out. You can then start selling to value by saying, if you implement our new waitlist contact management app that we've just built, we believe that you can increase your revenue by 50% in the next 6 months. Now, it's not 50% of the revenue, it's 50% from now. But these, I think, are great opportunities to look at in the very short term, which are almost guaranteed to work.
Imran has already asked question. Anybody else? Sir Idress, if you want to ask anything, or
I think Mark has been here for over 90 minutes. So let's give him some rest. And what about, Mark, if somebody had a small project like microfinance kind of thing, how would he think of?
Did you say like a microfinance? Because the audio just broke up just for a second.
Yeah, and somebody has a very small project, like microfinance kind of thing, and he is not in a position to go public. So how would that project think of scaling up?
Well, so I think that if you look at microfinance type projects, so scale is, let's say, a quantum difference from now. So you could have a small business that is a $200 business, and for them to go to a 2,000 business is 10x. That's huge. So if we stick at this microfinance side, it is absolutely possible to do that. I think what is probably, let's say, if I was helping that, I'd get that person to think differently about what they're doing, and I'd set them challenges. I would set them a challenge to say, okay, you spend half of your money here in this particular thing. I want you to work out how to reduce that amount of money by half and have the same stuff. How would you do it? Because what happens is that adversity is a very good spark to be creative, and that creativity can help you see things in completely different ways. And I'm reminded by this. There was an entrepreneur in Nepal that one of my friends is very close to, and he had a small chicken business. Now he has hundreds of thousands of chickens because he worked out that if he could pretty much, he didn't want to rear the chickens himself because that would take too much space. But he realized that a lot of small, like whatever, people with a small garden, they could have chickens. So he came up with chickens in a box. He would sell people the box with the chicks and the food necessary. Everything is in a box. And you buy the thing. And then I guarantee that I buy the chickens back from you once you raise them. So he has free-range chickens from around, but now he's getting premium bred chickens around the world, and he's just selling chickens in a box. This is good.
In our part of the world, in Pakistan, the literacy rate is around 60%. So 40% of the people are not literate.
Yep.
And even out of those 60%, there is a significant percentage who can just put their signatures or just read, but not. So what you would recommend for, as far as entrepreneurship is concerned, for those 40% who are not literate?
Mm-hmm.
Can they enter into entrepreneurship and be successful as but not literate enough, who cannot go through these maybe incubation centers? Because even in incubation centers, to learn something, you need to have some minimum literacy.
Actually, so just before COVID started, I was designing an entrepreneurship course for Uganda to help the literate, semi-literate, like illiterate and semi-literate people there learn to do business. Because the problem with an incubation center, typically by design, is that we teach, and MBA schools, is that we teach mostly tech companies. We try to create tech companies because they're fairly easy to do. Or we teach people to go and work in big business. So, however, I mean, I deliberately picked this Nepalese chicken farmer idea because this is somebody that was barely literate, but just was very savvy but had an understanding of numbers and had an understanding of customers and was exciting enough to work for that people would work for him. And he was fair enough to work for and good enough just balancing the books. So I think that there's they would need to be taught this type of, let's say, entrepreneurship that they need in a different way. It makes no sense to talk about a pivot. It makes no sense to talk about Elon Musk. It makes no sense to talk about product market fit. Yeah. It makes much more sense to teach basic numeracy, because then I've got whatever, 200, here's 100, which one's bigger? Because a lot of businesses are based on numbers. I think also where, let's say, business schools fail in providing entrepreneurship to the illiterate is that, like, I'm a professor at a business school. I think I'm very smart, but if I fail these people, I'm not smart at all.
Exactly.
What I need to do is that I need to get into their heads about what they want. Now, where I have seen that was interesting, so I did go to, is it Sindh? There's a IBS, so business school in Sindh province, and what they had done for Sucker is that one. So what they had done is that they found students that could be good students, but their language skills and basic education wasn't good enough. So they put them through a mandatory 1-year revision period before they could carry on. And those students outperformed the other students afterwards. So you can, let's say, take a little bit of a step back and give them basic support so they can get up. I mean, it would not be fun to be illiterate, so, and particularly if they would like to do better, this is something that can be given to them in parallel for teaching them business. But I think another problem that I've had personally, I find with business, is that very often we make business, the stuff that I've told you now is useless for you to create a sandwich shop. Useless. I wouldn't use any of this to create a sandwich shop. Or a chicken box.
True.
Actually, the chicken box might kind of... So, because if you like, I mean, this is, let's say, the assumption for a session like this is relatively high level of education, high level of sophistication, da 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 da. If, on the other hand, we were doing this at really basic level, then we use lots of pictures. And we talk really practical stuff about how you can help your family do this, this, this. However, but it's the same rules. It's just that somehow we've made our... we're a little bit too academic sometimes. Now, I find this as well. So I mean, a little warning for all of you business graduates out there. So I graduated business studies when I was 21, and by 23, I almost went bankrupt. Because what they didn't teach me at business school was cash flow. And this right now, for COVID, if you're going to do anything in business, cash is unbelievably precious, and I was never taught cash flow. Because then you work out cash is very, very precious. So ideally, don't spend any cash that you have. And debt, you can take on debt, but you have to pay it back again. But these are some practical things to think about.
Thank you. So I think it has been a great session. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure, especially the students, have learned a lot. Such a distinguished person, and we would definitely like to read your book, and I'm sure these students would also like. And me and Imran Jattala would be teaching something out of this, your book. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Imran sir, would you like to?
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. It was really a pleasure to have you. We learned a lot. I love scaling, so I enjoyed this session. I hope our students and startups also enjoyed. We would love to have you for more sessions, and post-COVID, post-lockdown, we would love to host you once again in Pakistan. We'll invite you for a lecture, rather a whole day seminar at Air University as well, and in other universities as well. We really look forward to learning more from you. Thank you very much. We're really grateful.
It is my pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night. Bye-bye.
We're in this together. Yeah. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.